Hello, everybody. It is Scott with Systems Are Sexy podcast. Today, I am joined by Bryce Perez. He's the founder of the Bravo team in Arizona and California, and also owner of 3D Virtually there. So today, we're going to talk about his expertise in the land. So, Bryce, you want to kind of let us in how you got into focusing on land? Because I think it's maybe some brokers shy away from it, but obviously a lot of success there.
Yes, I've been in the real estate industry since 2003. Started out with single family homes, as in first time home buyers and move up buyers. I guess you could say I sort of accidentally got into it, and it's been many years of learning. And the best way is this, I guess, failing, right? Where you make mistakes and then you learn, then you figure out, well, how do I get better? Eventually you come across something that changes what you do, as in you could say you can get dumb lucky, and then you realize, wait a second, what happened here and how can I do this again? And then that's when you really get your eyes open up and you're like, okay, I need to dive deeper into this new world that I didn't know existed. I need to have more capabilities in order to grasp the new realm that I'm in. And what I mean is that I came across a number of infill lots that were just listings that I got, and all of a sudden a developer showed up and wanted to turn it into something. And so that made me realize, well, maybe I should try that again. And so tried that again nearby in similar area. And then that turned into an assemblage. And then assemblage is where you get multiple owners to sell to one entity who's going to build something. In this case, it was the Salvation Army. And at that time, it was the McDonald's family money that was causing this, influencing this to happen. So that was my second eye opener of like, wow, okay, wow, this is a different world. The developer that they hired is a company that, in the time of the great expansion of pharmacies, they were doing all of the build outs for CVS pharmacy. So I learned quite a bit of working with them. So, after working with one more developer and another developer, we're like a dozen developers in now, more than a dozen developers of having worked with those. Each time you work with them, the project gets, you could say, more complex, gets a little bit bigger. And then you realize that there's so much more you don't know. So that's where you're like, okay, I need to learn more. And at that time, I began to study this designation. It's called CCIM, Certified Commercial Investment Member. It is somewhat to the equivalent of a real estate / finance degree. It's a couple hundred hours of training, plus you put your experience of investment transactions that need to total over 10 million. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, as I say it out loud, all of these facts about myself and about my history, it seems like a small amount in its total, which in the grand scheme of things, it is. But even to get to that point, I guess it took quite a while to get to that point, especially when the blind is leading the blind. When you don't know what you don't know, and you learn it as you go. And then, of course, then you get this new training, and all of a sudden you see the world in a completely different capacity. So you're able to assess the lay of the land. Yeah, pun intended. Where you see a vacant canvas and you're able to say, okay, here's what could go here. Here's how it would be. Here's the income it would produce. Here's the expenses it would have. Here's what it would cost approximately to build. Therefore, the residual value of this land could not or should not be more than this percentage amount of its total value. So these are all what would be, the technical term is it's called underwriting. It's called real estate underwriting at its, highest capacity. In many ways, you could say it's taught me how to become a Swiss Army knife of a very specific and niche lane in the real estate world, which is not an easy comprehension, and it's not an for everybody, and it's not an everyday thing because it does require the best word to say is a cadre. It's a cadre of information and skill sets in order to do this. As easily as one could say, when you're looking out at an empty field and you think, well, that should be easy. There's nothing on it. There's nothing on it. So therefore, how hard can it be to sell? The typical what's the word? Continence. The typical persona that most agents have when selling an asset they know nothing about is they usually their default response given to them by their trainers and their brokers is buyer to verify all information. Whenever you see that statement in a listing, that means that agent doesn't know shit. Or let me phrase that. I'll rephrase that so you can bleep that out. When an agent puts in their listing, buyer to buyer verify all information, it means that that agent is out of their league, period. Doesn't matter if they're some superstar in the residential market. That means they don't know anything. They're admitting it. Now, if you know something about the niche that you're in, you should know something. You'd be your client, your buyer client or your seller client would expect you to know enough to know the difference between a steer and a bull. Seriously, like if you don't know the difference, probably somebody's going to get hurt. And I say that, and I say that respectfully because it's easy to get away with not knowing when the dollar amounts are few, when there's only a few commas, one comma, for example. The moment you put two commas into the equation, into the numbers, you get two commas, and then there's a number or two numbers or three numbers after that second comma. It's a different game. It's an entirely different game on an entirely different level. The 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 developer or the seller, the owner of that asset or the buyer of that asset is playing 4D chess at a level that is beyond politics. It is something to be revered, something to be learned from, I should say, or inspired. I know when I work with individuals that is their world, I feel like it's just a cog in this bigger wheel. So I hope, am I keeping my point?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah,
Mr.
'cause I kinda wanted to dive into land because I think a lot of people understand buying a home or a building, commercial, but with land, it's different. I mean, you're there from before anything happens, so I think that's what's really interesting. You had mentioned assemblage, which I think is really interesting too. If you're trying to track down, let's say, owners, the parcels of land, what is that process like for you to find the decision makers or to find the person that you need to get a hold of?
So I can So I'm gonna go with what's going on with me today. So at the start of my day, after my morning cold plunge of 4 minutes at like
Long.
42 degrees of water, that at that temperature the water burns. What you really need to look at is who am I seeking to find? I know that sounds like a philosophical question, but without actually knowing them, you want to know before you dial the phone number or you show up to their doorstep or you find their email and send them an email. You want to know who exactly you're dealing with, as in what have they owned for their whole life? Can you tell how many things they've owned in their life? How many kind of agreements they've made? Sometimes if warranted, I'm going to look at how many is their name associated with litigation in any form or fashion, especially if the asset has at least two commas on it. I want to know they've been married before, how many children they have. So today, you're asking how, like what I've just said covers a broad spectrum of things. So there's a number of places that I look to find those things. So by the time I call the current trustee of this particular trust, I now have a good idea as to the general life story of this person. I know that this person has two adult children. I know this person is in their mid to late 80s. Are they still alive? Are they still ambulatory? I'm not sure, but they no longer have control of the particular asset that my client is interested in. This particular asset, I don't know what they want for it. I don't know if they want to sell it, but I do know that it's possibly worth anywhere between 10 and 15 on a good day. If they are reasonable people, they would say, I'll take that offer. If they're unreasonable people, maybe they say they want way more than that. Now, if they want way more than that, then it's going to be a much more difficult hurdle to get past. We're talking about a parcel of land that's very well situated within this town, fairly close to a mall. It's a significant size that could become a neighborhood of we'll call it 80 times 6. So, we'll call it a good 400, 500 units of housing. Now, If you can get it approved for more than medium density, maybe we're talking 600 units of housing. That's a lot of townhouses and apartments. Now I've lost my train of thought.
That's good. Because you're just talking about how you go about finding people, and I kinda wanted to go off of that and talk about, you mentioned you're really old school with it, but do you have a lot of business that's referrals or repeat business, or is it mostly new business for you?
When I work with buyers, it's a very small, select amount of people that is. Developer clients require a lot of time and resources to research the thing they want to do. And also because of the thing, if they're playing 4D chess in an area, when you go into that area to do the thing that they want to do, you're walking into that territory as their agent. That means that the level of trust, the level of loyalty, that bond must be beyond just a signature on a piece of paper because I'm acting on their behalf and they're requiring that I keep their confidence. So I have to know how to toe the line between being fair while maintaining my loyalty to my client. I do work with a lot of sellers and a majority of the sellers that I work with, most of them are what I would call, generally, once transactional, but I do have a small amount of sellers that I do work with on an ongoing basis, meaning they own multiple things. They own a portfolio that they are looking to, make movements with. And, it's usually somebody that I've helped buy a property and we're doing some improvements to it. And then there's a moment in time in the future where it's now time to sell it. And so I'm assisting in that part of the life cycle.
Gotcha. Okay. I think we talked recently about how you've gotten kind of put yourself more out there as far as video and social media. How has that been for you? Like, what is that process like? Are you starting to feel more comfortable with it?
Okay, yeah. So let me start that one over. Okay. So at the start of this year, I started doing some podcasts and some posts of the things that I do, both in real estate and real estate media. And, be learning how to be what's the word? Being, camera friendly or being used to being in front of a camera is not it's something that comes intuitive to me. I guess if I do this a lot, there is a part of me that learns how to, I guess you could call it, turn on my camera readiness. But I think when you see yourself on camera enough times, you begin to realize that it's probably best to just show up as you genuinely show up the, you know, with the flow of thought that you have and try not to try too hard. Yeah, there it is. Don't show up trying too hard to make a point or think about what point I'm gonna make. It's just, show up with like a fresh mind and just let the thoughts go through. Cause obviously when you do this enough times, you do get better at not humming and ohming and eyeing and the eyes going away to the side, which I still do way too much, but it's a lot better than when I first started. My mom watches my videos and always says, smile more, look into the camera and smile. So, I have to remember to do that.
Yeah, it's some good advice from your mom there. You kind of mentioned about in a previous answer about um, fall, as far as repeat buyers. Do you guys have a process to communicate with people if they're not ready to buy now or not ready to sell? That you stay in contact with people so you're kind of top of mind with them.
I'm gonna admit that I have not been good at doing that, and I probably should. I would probably capture more clients in doing that. My my one approach with going back to being in front of a camera and posting online was probably part of my intention is to have a presence and have an online presence that shows who I am and how I think to the people who either know me or are thinking about working with me that they could know that I would come up in their feed and then they'd say, okay, I remember this guy, or, this guy called me out of the blue. Maybe I should talk to.
To go off of that too, before you get to that point, do you have a process for lead generation, or is it mostly referrals for your clients?
I do have a small amount of referrals, but most of what I do is like so old school, which is cold calling. Like my listings are cold calling, really. And so then, I get listings and then those listings bring me buyers. But I have one particular developer client that has a good appetite for acquiring. And I'm like constantly reaching out to property owners on his behalf. And, in the process of doing that, I learned a lot of things about a lot of areas as to like what's going on. Cause it makes me look into an area of what's going on. So I have to I have to gain an instinct and a sense of awareness of how to get a sense of what's going on in an area very quickly.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of get into like the data and the operations of it all because you talked about being old school and being very involved, but obviously you rely a lot on financial modeling and pro formas and cash flow analysis. How much is that's done manually, or do you use software to kind of help you get through that process?
So my good friend ChatGPT does assist me in putting these things together. Now, that plus my training, you have to know what are the numbers that are important and how do these numbers come together and which of these numbers look appropriate and which of these numbers look inappropriate. So you essentially have to ask the questions. The questions are, what can this be used for? What can this land be used for? You have to have an under some some things have to kind of know already in order to be able to paint the picture. So like there are questions that developers ask themselves. If I'm going to spend X amount of construction, meaning if I'm going to go borrow this lump sum of money and I'm going to organize all of these resources to build this thing, and I'm going to be paying interest on this. Will there be income to support this effort? That means, will there be a demand for the supply I intend on creating? Those are general questions, right? Then you have to then dive in deeper as into actually what does that actually mean? So if we're talking about housing of a specific kind, you'd have to ask yourself the question, is there enough people wanting to live in this area or wanting to move into this area to support the extra housing you want to create? And when I create it, how long will it take for that housing to be absorbed? How long will the market take to absorb this new housing? That's what's called absorption, some basic development concepts. So once you begin to ask ourselves this question is well, then how many housing units can I create on this plot of land? So then that's like, okay, well, what does the existing zoning allow for? What new zoning could I potentially even get approved to do this higher density to get this new yield? So like, does ChatGPT know these things? It might know some of it. It might not know all of it. You'll need to know where to find the answers to those questions. Without having the initial know-how, there's no way you're going to organize it in any form or fashion. So you'll have to know some basic design standards, as in like what are lots usually, what's a usual typical lot size? What's the lot coverage, which is how much of a building footprint can be on a plot of land? How much of it must remain open? How much of it will be for roads? How much of it will be for open space or drainage? These are all typical basic design standards that most municipalities have. And they're in the United States, they're generally across the board very similar. I should say by the region, because New York City might have an entirely different view on that matter than we do out here in the Southwest. And Europe has an entirely different view of that as we do in the Southwest of the United States. So once you know the typical design standards of your area, then you can look at a plot of land and say, oh, okay, I think we can do that. And knowing that we can do that, then we're going to get so many units. This lot is going to yield X amount of units. And those units are likely to be of a certain footprint. Footprint being its square footage that it takes on the ground. And if it's single story, it'll be this square footage. If it's two-story, it'll be this square footage. If it's three-story, it's going to be a different square footage. So then if you're like, oh, I want to increase my density. Oh, well then, okay. Then, what type of building are you now building? Are we building shared wall buildings? Shared wall buildings and row housing, that's going to be duplex, fourplex, triplex. So that would then influence how you split your lots. Maybe if you're doing multifamily, maybe you do one big lot. And if you're doing one big lot and you're doing a mid-rise building. Each of these things begin to change what product you're bringing to the market. And when you define the product you're going to bring to the market, then you have to figure out, okay, well, what's it going to cost to build that? The first question you're going to ask yourself is there utilities? If the utilities are available, how close are they? And are those lines, do they have available capacity for this new supply that you're bringing to it? Now, you could look outside and think, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. There's a sewer line at the property line. Yeah, of course there's capacity. That's an assumption that could get you hurt if you don't really know the answer to that question, because the answer could be no, there isn't. It's possible that you might need to bring in a whole new line that's going to be a mile away, 2 miles away, 3 miles away, plus a number of other things that go with that. So it is not as simple as you think. So you have to figure out does that cost to bring that, right? Um, most developers, I would like to say there's a defining line that separates them. There's the ones that only want to go vertical. There are the ones that live in the horizontal, and then there are ones that live solely on paper. And I'm talking about development. And I know I described three terms that sound like, oh, well, what does that mean? So vertical is you build the building. Horizontal is termed as anything that would be called civil, as in civil engineering, which is usually the underground utilities and the drainage of the site. Paper, that's basically, they will design everything on paper, but they will not move an ounce of dirt. So each of those have an entirely different set of risk tolerances. The vertical guys, their risk tolerance is a lot less than the one that goes horizontal. The one that goes horizontal has less risk tolerance than the one that is only on paper. So the one that owns the building after it's built has even zero risk tolerance than the rest of them. So I'm like explaining a really long supply chain, basically, right? So once you figure out, okay, the utilities are to the edge of the property. Now you have to think, well, is the soil itself or the topography of this site, is it amicable for building? Is it difficult for building? Will I have to spend a lot of money leveling it? Will I have to spend a lot of money removing the topsoil and bringing different soil? Will I have to go deep into the ground to build my foundation? Like these are all, like how do you even know that? Well, you got to know a little something about something just to even get a sense of what exactly we're looking at. The moment you start building a mid-rise building, and a mid-rise building I'm going to define as greater than 3 stories, right? You go 4 or 5 stories, you go 6 stories, the foundations of that building is way more than a 2-story and a 3-story building. The pylons going into the ground are much deeper. The foundation is much bigger. The subcontractors that show up on site have to have, commercial licensing, not residential licensing. So the cost of the build goes up a lot, even though there are more floors. So, anybody that builds up to 3 stories, those are most likely residential type contractors. That's a much easier build across the board from the foundations to up and the safety standards that go with that. So anyhow, you do need to have a level of understanding of the cost differences of the two, because then once you figure out the site prep and the construction of the building, now then you have to start figuring What are the operational expenses? What is the operational burden of this property? Yes. So this is going to sound strange when I say this. If it's not 100 units, yeah, probably shouldn't do it. When it comes to like we're talking about multifamily. When it comes to doing a lot of units, you want to make sure there's enough scale for it to be worth having the conversation about the whole thing to begin with. Because the thing about scale is the extra burden of anything isn't amortized. It isn't lessened until there's scale. So that's the first. Um, some will call them family offices or institutions. Like ones that are traded on Wall Street or backed by them, don't want to see anything that's less than 200 units. So anyways, you figure out what the operational burden is, and then you figure out, well, okay, if it is leased out with a mix of these units. Right now, I'm talking specifically multifamily. So once you defined a general unit mix, multifamily developers usually do a couple different flavors. They're either going to do smaller units, studio type, one bedroom type. That's going to be for like downtown or university markets. If they're going to be doing more family style, affordable housing type housing, they're going to want bigger units. So if the site could support 400 units on smaller size mix, the developer that did the larger units might have 300 units. So then you're going to be basing your rents based on your unit mix. And so then you can then figure out, okay, rents in year one, once it's operational, are expected to be this. And here are my expenses. And so here's my net operating income. And then once you have your year one cash flows. Like this is assuming like it's called a pro forma, and you're assuming that you're full on day one, which in all reality you're not. But like to start out with, you write it as full year one, and then what does growth look like going 30 years out? What does the operational expense look like 30 years out? And then you apply whatever debt servicing they're going to have on it throughout that 30-year period. And that becomes the basis in which they can now make an educated guess on what they could possibly pay for that piece of land. I know that's a really long-winded answer for such a simple, like what you would think a simple question. So then if that became a self-storage facility, now similar approach. Now, but the difference now is going to be is more so about the market and the demographics. As in, can the market support it? How much supply of their time frame as I'm planning on opening up my store? Will I have too many competitors opening up at the same time? Like demographics and market saturation is going to be like super key. So we start talking about retail and self-storage market saturation is going to be like a primary. Housing, just general housing. That's more that you will focus on supply, but it's going to be more of, does this market have depth? As it depth meaning, is there enough people that live in the area? Is there enough people wanting to live in the area? Is there enough houses that have been built? Is there enough houses that are being built? Is there enough existing homes that are being sold again and again and again to suggest that if we bring new supply to the market, that there will be people that will buy it? Historically, existing housing generally is less expensive than new housing because new construction is deemed to have a premium, anywhere from 10 to 20% of existing supply. But in some occasions, it exists that it's reversed. So in many ways right now, new construction is cheaper. Typically right now in the Phoenix metro area, new construction as a general rule is cheaper than the existing home supply. So I don't know. I probably have covered a lot of things. I mean, we could start talking about the renewable energy market. That's an entirely different dynamics of site selection that is very different, very, very different than housing and retail.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about those, but you covered a lot there, so I really appreciate it. I was going to go a little bit different direction as far as like your time because there's a lot going on, and sometimes you got to play chess, not checkers, with your in your industry. But Is there a part of your business you wish you could automate, like wave a magic wand and it's automated so you don't have to manually do anything?
Man, there's a lot of things I wish I could automate. Yeah, yes, of course, absolutely, of course.
What would be the, let's say, the top 2 or 3 that you would love to, like, "Hey, if I don't have to deal with this, I got something that does this for me in the back end where I'm not physically involved." What would that be?
I'm gonna say the paperwork, probably. I know, you could say you could delegate it. Yeah, sure. In some cases, you can delegate some of the paperwork, but sometimes with some of the things that I do, that there's nuances. There's nuances that really have to be taught.
Okay. How you had mentioned ChatGPT, and I'm wondering how you feel about AI in your industry over the next 3 to 5 years.
You know, the it is in one aspect, it is a tool like a calculator that will empower us to take on more complexity at a greater speed. In many ways, one could say there are many jobs, there are many skill sets in our world that would be replaced by AI intelligence and robotics, or the fusing of the two, right? Robots with intelligence replacing many of the things that we as humans currently do. Could it be entirely possible for us humans who currently have the right of ownership? Well, we'll put it this way. If only humans were the only ones that maintained the right of ownership on property. Because if intelligent beings, like intelligent robotic beings, had the right of ownership on property, that would be an entirely different conversation. But let's just say that currently only humans have the right to own properties and robots with intelligence. The question then is, would humans only trust humans to guide them with some of the most challenging decisions of their life? So it isn't just the intellectual, factual side of deciding, of making big decisions that us humans have to make. They're also, we're human. And so at our core, we're also emotional beings. So the question is would people trust an intelligent robot to help them through difficult decisions? Maybe they do, but right now, the old school me would say, not in a million years, but I think I could be wrong, because they're saying that the humanity of the future is going to have relationships with robots. And so if we maintain relationships with robots, then all of the skill sets that require interpersonal relationship skills in order to like be in that field, then it's possible that even my field could become obsolete. I know it sounds horrible as I'm saying it.
Well, I think we'll end there, Bryce. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for